Hey everyone, welcome to the New Populist. If you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Well, we have an update from the chairman of BlackRock, Larry Fink. Now, if you're not familiar with Larry Fink and BlackRock, BlackRock is the largest asset management firm in the entire world. They control $10 trillion in assets. Just to give you some scale, the U.S. economy is $21 trillion a year. BlackRock controls $10 trillion. So this gives BlackRock an immense amount of power. Now, it's funny, we often talk about Klaus Schwab and the power he has over the world. And certainly he does have power. He's tied in with the elites, but he doesn't really own or control anything. He's more of a thought leader. Whereas Larry Fink controls an immense amount of assets that can bully the economy, and certainly politicians pay attention to the things that he says. So he releases letters to CEOs, to his shareholders periodically, and just recently he released a letter to the shareholders. And it's a very long letter detailing all sorts of issues, but there were three things in particular that he brought up that I want to talk about. The first one is globalization. Now, in the book, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, one of the things that he laments is that the pandemic sort of turned back globalization a little bit because individual countries were becoming concerned with supply chain issues, having people pour into their country because of the potential of illness, that it really sort of hurt globalization. And part of his book was discussing how do we get out of this pandemic and go back to globalization. And so he was trying to figure that out there. And likewise, Larry Fink talks about globalization and the results of this Russia-Ukraine war and how that is also hurting globalization. So I want to read this one section here from his letter talking about the issues of globalization. It was during this time that we started 34 years ago to build BlackRock. We saw the rise of globalization and growth of capital markets fueling a need for the kind of technology-driven asset management that we believed we could bring to our clients. We believed the world would come close together, and we saw that happen. I remain a long-term believer in the benefits of globalization and the power of global capital markets. Access to global capital enables companies to fund growth, countries to increase economic development, and more people to experience financial well-being. But the Russian invasion of Ukraine has put an end to the globalization we have experienced over the last 3 decades. We have already seen connectivity between nations, companies, and even people strained by 2 years of the pandemic. It has left many communities and people feeling isolated and looking inward. I believe this has exacerbated the polarization and extremist behavior we are seeing across society today. So here the global elites are lamenting this fact that globalization is being interrupted by the pandemic, by the Russian war. And he's even blaming this as a reason that we're seeing more extremist behavior. And again, this is that whole elite thing about diversity is our strength. Everything needs to be open. If it's not, that's somehow a negative. Now, we learned from this pandemic that our reliance on China was a national security issue. And China, if they wanted to, they could turn off our supply of certain medicines that we can't produce here that are absolutely necessary. So while we can say that globalization might help financially for these bigwigs to make money, there is national security implications. So now the global elite are scrambling, trying to figure out how to re-engage the world together and restart this globalization because we have these two huge impediments that have stopped it. And it's going to be curious going forward how they plan to re-implement globalization. And we have to pay attention to see what those plans are. I don't think they're clear yet. They've given us some signals, but I think they're still right now trying to figure out how to re-implement globalization. So we have to pay attention to how they do that. Now, secondly, he talks about the issue of inflation and what our central bank can do to battle inflation, but at the same time, how those actions could hurt the economy. And this is a point that I've made repeatedly, that the Federal Reserve is in a weird spot. If they increase interest rates, they cool down inflation, but they also kill the economy. So they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do you battle inflation and potentially hurt the economy, or do you let inflation continue? And the problem is there's no good answer. You can't solve that problem just by financial manipulation. If you shut down a large part of your economy for a period of time, those chickens have to come home to roost. So the best way to avoid these situations like inflation, and the best way to avoid these situations where the central bank has to make this choice, is to avoid it in the first place. And unfortunately, our politicians, because they're idiots and they're short-sighted and they're economically illiterate, don't really get this, and they try to solve the problem or they try to fix a problem that is not fixable. You have to go through the hard times when you print tons of money and shut down large sectors of your economy. So those chickens will come home to roost at some point. Will it be this year? Will it be next year? I don't know, but it will happen. Be prepared for that. And he says this here again in his letter. Central banks are weighing difficult decisions about how fast to raise rates. They face a dilemma they haven't faced in decades, which has been worsened by geopolitical conflict and the resulting energy shocks. Central banks must choose whether to live with higher inflation or slow economic activity and employment to lower inflation quickly. So Larry Fink is not economically illiterate. He understands this, and he just basically said what I just said. They have a choice here, and it's not a good choice. They're between a rock and a hard place, and whatever they do, it will end badly for us, and just be prepared for that. Now, the last thing he mentions is the issue of digital currency. And unfortunately, I think we're heading in this direction. Will happen over the next few years, 10 years, I don't know. But we're definitely moving in that direction for several reasons. But first, let me read what he says here about digital currency. Finally, a less discussed aspect of the war is its potential impact on accelerating digital currencies. The war will prompt countries to reevaluate their currency dependencies. Even before the war, several governments were looking to play a more active role in digital currencies and define the regulatory frameworks under which they operate. The U.S. Central Bank, for example, recently launched a study to examine the potential implications of a U.S. digital dollar. A global digital payment system, thoughtfully designed, can enhance the settlement of international transactions while reducing the risk of money laundering and corruption. Digital currencies can also help bring down costs of cross-border payments, for example, when expatriate workers send earnings back to their families. As we see increasing interest from our clients, BlackRock is studying digital currencies, stablecoins, and the underlying technologies to understand how they can help us serve our clients. Now, I like how he gives the example that a digital currency can fight back against money laundering, corruption, and help families send money back to or workers send money back to their families. So he's pointing out these positive reasons why we would want a digital currency. Now, there's a flip side of this that he's not talking about. If you have a digital currency, you basically have a currency like marked bills. And the problem right now is that there are countries all across the world that have tons of reserves of US dollars that they can move around and we can't track or do anything about. But if you have a digital currency, a digital dollar, where every dollar has its own signature and that signature is logged in the system, if you have that dollar and the government doesn't like you or deems you to be a criminal or somebody that's a threat to the US government, they can just turn your money off. Think about that. They go in the system, they say, okay, this currency that we've created with this digital signature, we've turned it off, it can't be used. So is this about facilitating economic growth and security, or is this about power and control? Well, if history is any lesson, this is more about power and control. And when we have rogue states, for example, again, who have US dollars, if we can turn their money off, we have another huge economic weapon to use against countries that don't participate in the system in the way that we want them to, like, for example, Russia or Iran or Yemen, for example. So this talk of digital currencies showing up in BlackRock's letter to the shareholders, just another indicator that we're moving in that direction. He would not say this for no reason, just spitballing. If he's bringing it up, it has importance. And as a man who runs a company that controls $10 trillion in assets, we need to listen. So I think this was an interesting indicator of where we're heading in the future. Well, that's it for now. Again, if you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.